Allow me to introduce our guest speaker who will be delivering opening remarks. Jamie Walsh is the PR, the Deputy Permanent Representative of Ireland in Geneva. If you cover disarmament, I'm sure you already met him. He's one of the most active diplomats here in Geneva, also very supportive of integrating gender into arms control processes. And in addition to having a lot of practical experience, Jamie is also a scholar in arms control, non-proliferation, and disarmament. So we're very much looking forward to hearing from him about the issue today, gender mainstreaming in conventional arms control. Jamie, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks so much, Renata, for that very generous introduction. I have to say, I'm not sure it's warranted, especially since I didn't have my coffee this morning, and after a month in New York, nearly for first committee, my brain is a little bit like scrambled egg. But I'll do my best. And thanks to you, thanks to everybody for joining this morning. It's really welcome. I think you're the hardcore for a 10 o'clock Monday morning session. It's really appreciated that you've shown up, and I look forward to your participation as well. And thank you so much as well, as I say, to UNIDIR for organising this regional briefing on such an important issue. As you know, Ireland is a long-standing champion of gender issues across all disarmament and arms control and non-proliferation processes. And likewise, we're very proud supporters as well of UNIDIR's excellent gender and disarmament program, which does an amazing amount of work in this space. I'd also like to thank Renata, Hannah and Erica as well for their ongoing work carried out through these surveys with national authorities, international organizations and civil society groups that work in mine action and small arms and light weapons. And I really do look forward to hearing about those preliminary findings as soon as I've concluded my remarks. But just to flag that the scope of that work really is hugely important and really quite breathtaking. So looking forward to hearing the outcome on that. I think this regional focus is a really interesting one as well. I think it helps us as WEOG to take stock of where we are and what more we could be doing in this space. But of course, as well, it's also important when we've done that as well to take a kind of a cross-regional approach. And in that regard as well, Ireland's very proud to be part of the Disarmament Impact Group with Australia, Namibia, Philippines, and of course as well, once again, holding the flag for gender issues, always UNIDIR. It's very encouraging to see that applying a gender perspective across the full range of foreign policy issues is becoming a common cross-cutting and horizontal priority for many WEOG states. Many of our states, of course, champion the women, peace and security agenda and advocate for issues of gender and disarmament in general. And for Ireland, that's practiced in the main through and reflected in the main through our successive national action plans on women, peace and security, which includes actions related to both conventional weapons and weapons of mass destruction. But I'm conscious we're focusing today mainly on conventional weapons. In all our disarmament work, though, we recognise that applying a gender analysis or a gender lens is absolutely vital to achieving more equitable, more effective and more sustainable outcomes. And this type of an analysis for us enables us to understand the relationships between women, men, girls and boys and how they're impacted in conflict situations and also impacted by different types of weapons. In integrating these gender analysis into policy development, implementation and review, we're meaningfully contributing to realising a more safe, more secure world, and it's all in line, of course, as well with the Sustainable Development Agenda. In general, representatives and delegations, of course, though remain very male-dominated. And despite the, I suppose, individual efforts of certain states or certain groups like the Disarmament Impact Group, there are still very deep-set structural barriers, both to participation and even to discussions on gendered impacts of weapons as well. So oftentimes we're prevented from even having these discussions in certain settings. And many of you on the call, I'm sure, will be familiar with that through our work here in Geneva, where these issues are often blocked. And of course, as well, many of us have just returned from first committee, like myself, where these difficulties were on full show in many respects. A number of unprecedented votes, I believe, were called on the Women, Disarmament, Non-Proliferation and Arms Control resolution, where we had 8 paragraph votes and a vote on the whole of the resolution, and votes called elsewhere where we were trying to integrate gender language into First Committee resolutions. And in Geneva as well, we also see it, of course, in the Conference on Disarmament and the debate there over updating the rules of procedure to make them gender neutral. Now, I hope that that's because we're at a tipping point in this conversation, and that those states that are most reluctant are in a way fighting harder than before to maintain an older version of this conversation. After all, there's very robust evidence base which supports the rationale for better reflection of gendered impacts across the various conventions and treaties. And I do think that the tide is shifting, but equally, I think we're also facing a much more difficult challenge to kind of concretize the outcomes that were and the research findings from organizations like UNIDIR. So just a very brief couple of words perhaps as well on the 1325. It's of course over 20 years now since the adoption of UNSCR 1325, and the unfortunate reality is that the area of disarmament and non-proliferation continues to lag behind a little bit on the progress seen in other international domains on this important agenda. I mean, for me, it's always struck me that the WPS agenda, which is very central to our understanding of armed conflict and these issues in a general sense, doesn't actually address the weapons used to wage those conflicts. Apart from a brief reference on the need for gender-sensitive mine action and a reference to disarmament, demobilization and reintegration programs, 1325 is pretty much silent on the relevance of gender issues to arms control and disarmament. And it doesn't address the impacts, the rights, or the roles of women in regulating these arms. It's very encouraging that some states are increasingly exploring opportunities to build bridges between WPS and disarmament agendas within the multilateral system. And again, that's an area where I know UNIDIR has done quite significant work. And we are seeing it across mine action, small arms and light weapons, and hopefully increasingly through this OEWG on ammunition management as well, where there are very positive signs. And 2 weeks from today, of course, we have the 20th meeting of states parties to the APLC, or the Mine Ban Treaty, I should say. We're here in Geneva. And of course, that convention has seen significant progress in gender mainstreaming, and that can inform and help us to inform other instruments as well. And Mine Ban Treaty's Oslo Action Plan, of course, provides a very practical roadmap for states parties to ensure that gender considerations form a core part of the treaty's implementation across issues like risk reduction, victim assistance, and international cooperation and assistance. And of course, one of the useful things in that convention, one of the more innovative tools that has been used has been the appointment of gender and diversity focal points. They've proven, I think, very valuable and have inspired the creation of similar types of functions, for example, in the Convention on Cluster Munitions, and equally as well, the TPNW has a gender focal point as well. I think this individual state operating in that way can be very, very useful, and also individual focal points in states parties can be quite a helpful approach. Best practices established through other conventions as well in promoting gender mainstreaming can serve as lessons learned to be applied in emerging arms control processes. As I mentioned, I hope to see that in the open-ended working group on conventional ammunition, which again, as Renata mentioned as well, will hold its next session in February in New York. But while the OEWG on ammunition is still very much in its infancy, it would be prudent to promote gender mainstreaming at an early stage in that process. And to that end, I think the joint statement on gender delivered, I think by Panama, a group of 29 states during the second substantive session in August this year, was a very encouraging step in the right direction. And this signal and this type of activity should, of course, be as well carried forward through in whatever means we can do. And there are means available to us, including working papers, side events, research publications and so on, panel discussions. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity, particularly on the OEWG and ammunition, and hopefully we'll hear a little bit more about that in the next hour or so. Other notable areas of progress include the outcome on the decision on gender and gender-based violence from the Arms Trade Treaty. I'm thinking of CSP5 here, although there has been, of course, work done since CSP5. But that CSP did, of course, have as its thematic focus gender issues in the Arms Trade Treaty, and resulted in a list of recommendations related to gender representation and participation, gendered impacts of armed violence, and the GBV risk assessment criteria, as well as in other areas as well where we've seen good progress. I mentioned earlier as well the Convention on Cluster Munitions, and the Lausanne Action Plan there has been very, very successful, I think. Next week, we have annual meetings of the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons. That's here in Geneva, including on Protocol 5, AP2, and then, of course, as I say, the annual meeting of high contracting parties. And unfortunately, the CCW has been something of a laggard when it comes to promoting these issues, unfortunately. Some of the progress in advancing gender considerations in the CCW, I would say, leaves a lot to be desired. And we need to ask ourselves, I think, as a region, what we can do to transfer lessons learned from other conventions into conventions like the CCW, where we see less progress. So today, in today's Q&A session, after our imminent presentations from UNIDIR, it would be really, really valuable, I think, to hear from states and civil society on your ideas around some of these issues that we flagged this morning, and across all of the multilateral conventional disarmament and arms control processes. I'll leave it there for now, Renata. I've probably gone on for far too long as it is anyway, but you know me very well and know that I can continue to speak even after my time has elapsed. But as I say, I'm very eager to get on to both the presentations and the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jamie. We really appreciate your insights and as well as Ireland's leadership in this area. You already flagged some of the issues we want to address in our presentation, but that's great. Today's discussion, as I said, we're focusing on conventional arms control, but many of the issues that we'll be discussing, as Jamie said, could be applied and could serve as insights for other areas of arms control as well. To begin with, just this, basic question, the how question: how can we integrate gender perspectives in arms control, non-proliferation, and disarmament? Because we see a lot of interest in this area, but sometimes, practitioners are not really sure how to do it. So here we've outlined 3 main avenues that we've been seeing that have been implemented in this area. The first one is about promoting gender equality and improving women's participation. So the participation representation issue in arms control and disarmament fora. The second avenue is applying a gender lens, a gender analysis to issues of weapons. So as Jamie said, we can see how weapons are used to facilitate gender-based violence, or how certain types of weapons affect more women than men, or more men than women, for instance, landmines. And the third area we've seen to address the question of how has been to connect policy agendas to make sure that our work on arms control and disarmament is connected with the work on the SDGs, with the work on the Women, Peace and Security agenda, for instance. And this has been happening on the ground through the adoption of national action plans on 1325, for instance. Where we have seen some coordination on national strategies to deal with proliferation of small arms and light weapons, and national strategies to support gender equality and women's empowerment, for instance. So this is just an overview. If we can go to the next slide, is to think also of why are we doing this? Why do we do this work? Just want to get this question, out of the way so we can address the main issues, but it's important that we reiterate why gender equality in arms control and disarmament matters. Well, firstly, it's an issue of equal rights. Women and men have the same rights to participate in decision-making, in program implementation, you know, in the decisions that will affect their lives. Another reason why we do this work, it's because it's important to understand different needs and important to improve response strategies, because this will help us increase resilience and aid recovery following weapons use. A gender lens can also help us to uncover associations between gender and power. It can help to reduce gender inequalities, or at the minimum least, avoid exacerbating them. It can help us to improve policy coordination, ensuring that programs and policies deliver for all. And in this particular field where women have been underrepresented, it can unlock professional opportunities for women and have a positive impact in their lives and in their communities. And again, the lesson from Mine Action that we will see is that also, you know, there are very interesting testimonies and analysis being collected by operators on the ground about how employment of women in Mine Action has led, you know, to economic empowerment and improved their life and their status in the community as well. So this is just, you know, the background before we get started with the issues. If we can go to the next slide. Our starting point today is gender and mine action. And that's because we have an upcoming meeting of the APMBC later in November. But also because this has been an area that has had a lot of progress in integrating gender into their work. If we can go to the next slide as well, you will see that we already have a framework for addressing gender considerations in mine action, which is very advanced, which is the Oslo Action Plan. In addition to that, we also have a lot of work happening on the ground. So the APMBC, it's a good starting point for us to think how far we have gone in this convention, what have been the challenges, what are the best practices, and are these lessons transferred to can be transferred to other frameworks as well. So the Oslo Action Plan, which will be in force from 2020 to 2024, it requires countries to mainstream gender considerations in mine action programming, including mine risk education and victim assistance. When reporting on these programs, state parties must present data disaggregated by gender and age. And the collection of sex and age disaggregated data is important because it can lead to a better understanding of the barriers that prevent survivors and other vulnerable groups from accessing services. Another kind of innovation we saw in the APMBC was that in 2019, the review conference amended the working methods of the convention committees and appointed each of the 5 committees appointed a focal point to provide advice on gender mainstreaming. So this has been going on 2020, 2021, 2022. It's a relatively new development in arms control and disarmament, but I think we can already start to conceptualize and think about, you know, the impact these gender focal points have had. What are the conditions that enable their work? What are the challenges they face? And is this an interesting model to apply in other conventions? Since the APMBC, the CCM has also appointed a gender focal point, and the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the TPNW, also adopted an action plan with a gender focal point. So I think this is something that our arms control and disarmament community can start to reflect upon. What are the best models for taking gender mainstreaming forward in these distinct conventions? I don't know if any APMBC gender focal point is in attendance today, or a country that has had this position before and would like to share some lessons learned during the Q&A, that would be very welcome. If we can go to the next slide. Here we would like to tell you a little bit about the synergies between mine action, but not only mine action, IED related work as well, and the Women, Peace and Security agenda. So as Jamie said, we have the meeting of the high contracting parties and the CCW meetings starting, I think, next week, if I'm not mistaken. And one interesting development that we had in 2022 was that UNIDIR was called to brief the AP2 meeting of experts in July about the relevance and the linkages between IEDs and the Women, Peace and Security agenda. So this is a bit of a recap of something that happened in July this year, but that we also think could be discussed again in the next meeting of the CCW. So the WPS agenda, it has 4 main pillars: participation, prevention, protection, and relief and recovery. And we can see the relevance between these 4 pillars and IED and Mine Action, in the sense that the participation of women and their employment in different roles in Mine Action and in IED related work is transformative and contributes to their economic and political empowerment. The ban on use of landmines and the destruction of their stockpiles also contributes to the prevention and protection from armed violence. Gender and diversity sensitive education to the risks of landmines and to the risks of IEDs prevent injuries and save lives, which is also an objective of the WPS agenda. Victim assistance and advocacy for rights of survivors help to combat the high level of sexual and gender-based violence we see in conflict-related and conflict situations. And clearance and handover of land previously contaminated by landmines can redress gender imbalances and empower women in community. For instance, if you attach a program of land clearance with, let's say, reform regarding property rights, so that women can also own land in certain contexts where they were not allowed before. So this is just, a bit of out of the box thinking on how we can connect these different agendas. And I welcome your feedback as well on the best way to do this. So here is my final slide on areas for action. So some ideas for the APMBC and CCW AP2. Again, reiterate the call for full and meaningful participation of women, as well as the inclusion of more diverse voices in multilateral meetings, such as survivors and their representative organizations. This is, again, an area where the APMBC has, led the way. We always see survivors organizations and also youth organizations taking the floor in those meetings. We call also this call for support mechanism for disaggregated data collection related to patterns of landmine and IED casualties, as well as the needs of survivors. Another idea is to include mine action and IED threats in WPS national action plans and to support the work of the gender focal points. Now I would like to give the floor to my colleague Hannah, who will talk more about the other area of work we'll be covering today, which is weapons and ammunition management.
Everybody, hello, I'm Hannah Salama, and I am a researcher on the Gender and Disarmament Program at UNIDIR, and I'm very pleased to be with you today to speak about gender and weapons and ammunition management and to share some of the findings of a report that we did last year on women in technical roles for weapons and ammunition management. Can we go to the next slide, please? So as Jamie mentioned and Renata, UNIDIR has done a lot of research on women's participation in arms control and disarmament diplomacy, but also implementation. So in diplomacy, we did a report in 2019, which showed that women across all arms control and disarmament forums in general constitute only 30% of delegations. And when we looked at the heads of delegations in these arms control fora, which go beyond conventional weapons as well, women only constituted 20%, or were only heads of delegations in 20% of delegations. So in 2020, we had a closer look at women's participation in conventional arms control. And we decided to look at roles, technical roles, such as ammunition technical officers, explosive ordnance disposal specialists, roles in the physical stockpile and security management of arms. So we did this through a publication called Women Managing Weapons. And we found that it was first difficult to gather gender disaggregated data about these roles, but we found that women were severely underrepresented. So we based this on two things. First, we did a review of 152 WAM-related trainings, and we saw that women out of these trainings, the technical trainings, only constituted 12% of participants. When we looked at policy-related trainings to WAM, the picture was a bit more encouraging, and there was more of an equal representation of women, but still the technical trainings faced kind of a lack of women, and the number was very low. We also, beyond these numbers, we interviewed 40 women and men who were professionals in the field of weapons and ammunition management. And we found that through these interviews that women still faced institutional barriers, stereotyping, and discrimination in the field of WAM. So a large part of the problem was that these roles, such as ammunition technical officers, EODs, stockpile managers, etc., were found in national security institutions. And these institutions, as we all know, are male dominated. And in some cases, they still have policies or practices that may be viewed as discriminatory towards women, or in any case are not very encouraging of women to join. So next slide, please. Again, I think it's important to look at, you might be wondering at this point, well, what is the importance of women in these technical roles? So I think just again to reiterate what Renata has said, but to also borrow a quote from a UIOG Prime Minister, we're in 2022. So women and men, have the right to participate in decision making and implementation of arms control processes. And in fact, as Renata alluded to, there has been several studies that found in Mine Action that a gendered balanced workforce makes for a more efficient workforce and increases the effectiveness and safety of explosive ordnance disposal. And so this can be also transferred to other fields of technical arms control. And many of the people we interviewed found that working with a diverse team really helped them think about the different needs of men, women, boys and girls, and the community in general. So again, the importance also lies with opening up job opportunities for women that were previously not there. And this is specifically really important in the context of post-conflict, where women's roles can be transformed from just victims of conflict to active players in the reconstruction of their community. So here we think it's really important to involve them in technical arms control roles. Next slide, please. So to be brief, this is a couple of ideas from the report that we have found on how to improve women's participation in technical roles. And I also look forward to hearing from member states and civil society on more ideas on how to do this. But I just wanted to start off by saying that we can start with the women that are already in these roles. So supporting women's professional networks have been shown to be really helpful in women's in the career progression of women, and we have example here from policing or even career networks within UN Police. And I'm really pleased to say that actually ODA with the support of member states has initiated a network on ammunition technical officers, on women ammunition technical officers, and we will be inaugurating this network this week. So that's a real kind of impact of the findings of the report. I think, all all actors have a role to play in improving women's participation in security institutions, but also specifically in WAM technical roles, and that includes international organizations like the UN or international specialized NGOs that are assisting states on weapons and ammunition management. And so for states, I think it's important to really have a review, a gendered review of national legislations and policies that relate to national security institutions. And I also think they could fund more opportunities for women to join WAM technical roles, such as more training opportunities, or make funding conditional on women's participation, or fund projects that are geared towards identifying barriers and addressing barriers to women in this field. For international partners, I think increasing the opportunities for civilians to be trained in WAM was identified as a very important part of increasing women's participation in technical roles. So this means that women don't have to come from a security background, but can get on-the-job training or can be trained in these technical roles by NGOs and specialized organizations. There's more that I think states and actors can do, and I think I would invite you to consult our blog, 8 Ways to Support Women's Participation in WAM Roles, and it can be found in the chat, and my colleague kindly put it there. And beyond these 8 ways, I'm sure we can find much more tips and advice, so I hope to hear from you in the Q&A as well. And right now, I'd like to pass it on to my colleague Erica to talk about ammunition management.
Thank you very much, Hannah, and good morning, everyone. So my name is Erica Mumford with UNIDIR's Conventional Arms and Ammunition Program, and I'll be sharing a bit more about the group of governmental experts on the problems arising from the accumulation of conventional ammunition stockpiles in surplus and how they have mainstreamed gender into its work progressively. So to start, the GGE on ammunition was first convened in 2008 to assess the potential threats posed by surplus ammunition stockpiles. And since its formation in 2008, the GGE has progressively focused on promoting a holistic approach, also known as a full life cycle of ammunition, and promoting the through life management of ammunition. And part of promoting a holistic approach to conventional ammunition management has been progressively considering how gender and gender mainstreaming can be taken into account. And so while there is a clear link between gender and ammunition management, the gender mainstreaming aspects of the 2008 GGE has lagged to begin with since its formation, but we have seen an increasing focus since its initial convening. And some experts have suggested that this lack of gender mainstreaming in the 2008 GGE was due to the more technical and male-dominated focus of the process, and also considering participation from national security institutions and ministries of defense. And over time, we've seen the GGE taking substantial steps to overcome some of the barriers to women's participation. And we've seen increasingly gender mainstreaming coming into the discussions and the debates, and also policies and practices around ammunition management. And for example, over time, the process has diversified its participation away from the ministries of defense, and it has become more diverse in terms of participation. And the 2020 GGE, which built off of the 2008 work of the GGE, in 2020, the group expanded and diversified its participation. So in 2020, we saw the group including 18 member states reflecting different regional groups and diverse views. And gender parity was reached in the composition of the GGE, which set an important benchmark for the full and effective participation in women. And we also have seen in 2022 that the GGE called for gender mainstreaming of policy and practice as its thematic focus. And this work was also recognized in the General Assembly Resolution 7465 of 2019 of the need to encourage the full involvement of both women and men in ammunition management policy and practice. And so following this work, the open-ended working group was established following the GGE's report of September 2021. And the open-ended working group was tasked to address the existing gaps in through-life ammunition management and to elaborate a set of political commitments as a new global framework. And so the OEWG started its work in February 2022 with a first organizational session, and we have since had two substantive sessions, the most recent in August of 2020. And the OEWG has integrated gender analysis and perspectives into the debates. And most recently, in its August session, the OEWG called to further consider gender perspectives and implications with respect to the through-life ammunition management. And during this session, many states also called for the exchange of best practice and the development of guidance on how to integrate gender dimensions into through-life ammunition management. Next slide, please. And so in the context of the GGE, we see a number of areas of interest to exchange good practice in this area. And we have a few areas of action that can relate to the weapons management practice as well as conventional ammunition. And starting with the multilateral and regional level, we see it would be useful to consider the gendered impacts of small arms and light weapons and ammunition. And we've seen a growing body of evidence in this area to understand the gendered impacts of diversion, of the poor management of small arms and light weapons and ammunition, and also unplanned explosions at ammunition storage facilities. And diverted ammunition and small arms can also be used to facilitate human rights violations, including sexual and gender-based violence and domestic violence. And beyond these immediate consequences in terms of physical security, there is also an increased risk of armed violence and longer-term humanitarian, socioeconomic, and public health, as well as environmental consequences. So it's important for these diverse impacts to be considered as part of a comprehensive approach to ammunition and weapons and ammunition management. Next, we can consider gender responsive provisions in WAM processes, as well as the open-ended working group on ammunition, and also the sharing of national good practice and expertise on gender mainstreaming. And we also see that strengthening synergies between international frameworks and promoting complementarities with gendered provisions of different arms control and disarmament mechanisms as being useful to support weapons and ammunition management, and understanding how these can support broader frameworks related to gender equality and sustainable development. So strengthening these synergies. The next slide, please. And at the national level, we can also focus on collecting and promoting research to understand the varied impacts of small arms and light weapons and ammunition management. So the collection of gender and age disaggregated data would be important to support this understanding. And we would also suggest that states can ensure that the expertise to document the impacts of ineffective ammunition management and unplanned explosions at ammunition sites be taken into consideration, as well as considered in planning decisions. And we can also ensure the full, equal, meaningful, and impactful participation in women in the design, implementation, monitoring, and oversight of weapons and ammunition management at all levels. So this can involve ensuring that both men and women are equally represented, and that staff with gender expertise are actively involved in the various functions of through life management, and also ensuring that the diverse teams can promote more innovation and more sustainable decisions, and promoting the full participation of women in all their diversity can include promoting the participation of young women, and also promoting their involvement in decision-making and oversight processes. And so these areas of action have the potential to really enhance the effectiveness and inclusivity of the conventional ammunition process, and also weapons and ammunition management. And so with this, we'd be happy to also hear your perspectives and national views on these ideas and actions. And so I'll turn the floor back to you, Renata. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Erica. Thank you very much, Hannah. Now we have some, I mean, after this presentation where we did a bit of a recap, a bit of a refresh of what's been going on in gender and conventional arms control, we have some questions that we'd like to pose for discussion. But you're also, very welcome to come up with other questions that are not among the list. So if we can go to the next slide, our idea was to, share what's been going on in terms of gender mainstreaming in APMBC, AP2, and OEWG on ammo, but also to have a broader discussion if you'd like to share what are some good practices on integrating gender perspectives into national policies on arms control and disarmament from your context. What are the opportunities and challenges you see in your region? Regarding the focal points in multilateral conventions, what is needed to ensure that they can fully realize their mandates. We have another slide also with some questions that we would like to see. Leticia, can you move to the other one as well? So what is needed to effectively deliver age and gender sensitive assistance to survivors? What are good practices in terms of promoting women's meaningful participation in WAM and beyond? And what kind of research and evidence would be useful in the field of gender and conventional arms control to advance this agenda from your perspective? With this, I'd like to open the floor. Feel free to make interventions in the chat or to raise your virtual hand. Anyone would like, we welcome perspectives from states, but also civil society and other stakeholders that may be present in the call as well. We know it's a lot that we presented today. So you also, if you have questions or would like us to go back and explore any of the issues further, we're happy to do so. But just to say from our side at UNIDIR, we are always open to hear your suggestions. At the moment, we are working on this best practice survey that you helped us share the link to your national focal points, and we are in the process of analyzing the different action plans we received for gender mainstreaming that different organizations are implementing. And we've also been asking national points of contact, what has driven change in their organizations and what the impact they have seen. And so far, it's some interesting, the responses have been interesting in the sense, I think the majority of people have answered that change has been happening from internal processes rather than necessarily, international multilateral processes. So I'm sure each country has a different context, But if you'd like to share, what do you think has worked and what doesn't work from your perspective? That's also very useful for us as we are in the process of writing up this report. I see a question in the chat. Is there an opportunity for gender focal points to better communicate with the EU member states firearms focal points? That's a very interesting question. I think it's a matter of increasing dialogue and finding the best way to institutionalize, coordinate, exchange between different kinds of focal points. And we know policy coordination can be a challenge. We have so many of these working groups and different sets of ways of communicating to make sure, you know, everybody is on the same page. But that's a very good point. I don't know if anyone has a comment on this, how gender focal points can better communicate with the EU firearms focal points.
I just wanted to encourage member states, maybe like as a safe space to really honestly talk about like what are the challenges of integrating gender perspectives, or sometimes it can be something as simple as resources or time or expertise. I know that there's for the most part always a goodwill to ensure that delegations are balanced, that there are increasing women's participation. But sometimes, throughout the research, we've identified that more structural or procedural issues have come up that can prevent better women's participation. So we're always interested to know about those and how to address them. So yeah, I'll just leave it with more questions to the group.
Yes, I think we have a hand from Brian. Brian, the floor is yours.
Good morning, colleagues. Thanks very much indeed to UNIDIR for your very detailed and insightful presentation. I think just to break the ice, I'll share some views and perhaps just some food for thought. As you said, Monday morning, and I think the post first committee hangover, if you will. It's scrambled eggs brains is I think the best way of putting it. So thanks to Jamie for that image. I think in terms of best practices, and please forgive me because I am very new to this file, but in the last 2 months that I've been working here in Geneva, I've seen some roadblocks in terms of the international geopolitics, but I think there are a lot of countries that do bring some very good practices to the table. I think for Canada's part, one of my personal experiences, and I think I did mention this at one of the side events at the Arms Trade Treaty earlier in the summer, was literally the first week of me on the job. But the more I've reflected on that, and after 3 weeks in New York, it has struck me as kind of a really good practice in terms of bridging the gap between our policy commitments and reality. And our permanent mission in New York has a public-facing gender pledge, which really operationalizes a lot of the commitments that we had in our National Action Plan for WPS. So I can share the link in the chat, but there's a lot of good food for thought there in terms of regularizing and making it more of an automatic reflex to evaluate if you've been invited to speak on a panel, to make sure that there is checking with the organizers whether or not there's gender balance. Also age balance in some of those contexts as well, and regional representation. I could go on at length about what's in that. I think it speaks for itself if you're able to take a look at it, but I think there's different areas, even in the context of hiring practices within the mission. Not all of our missions have these kind of forward-leaning pledges, gender pledges, but I think it within our system has been a really good example of how to have the poetry or the policy meet the plumbing or the reality on the ground. The only other thing I'll flag is that Canada is currently going through the drafting of our third national action plan on WPS. I was on a 8 p.m. call Geneva time to dial into Ottawa. But I think that is one of the areas that we are looking at bringing a lot more language in, including indicators, so that we're able to harvest data from a gender desegregation perspective. But again, it's our third go at this, and it's an iterative process. And I think a lot of us are learning on the job. But the more that I think diplomats here in Geneva are able to connect with our HQ or capital-based staff, particularly when they come here for the meetings of states parties, I think that the set of guideline discussion questions that you've just shared with us are actually really good coffee conversations with colleagues. So yeah, I'll leave that with folks, and hopefully that helped break the ice. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Brian. This is super interesting and exactly the kind of thing, we're looking for, different contexts, different countries finding different solutions to address a common problem. So if you can share the link to the Gender Pledge, we'd be very happy to take a look and learn more about this initiative. Talking about links in the chat, my colleague Manaved has also shared with you a link for a feedback survey, because we're actually about to wrap up today's briefing. And in order to do that, I would like to invite our director, Dr. Robin Guys, to deliver some closing remarks. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Renata. Good morning, everyone. Good to see so many of you on a Monday morning and in a busy period of the year, certainly. So thanks very much for joining us here today. Thanks to the team, of course, for the briefing and for organizing it. I should say that these quarterly, this is the scale on which we offer it, quarterly briefings to the UN regional groupings, and of course we offer this to all regional groupings, came out of the subvention increase that we received last year. So for everyone on the call, good things come out of subvention increases. This certainly gave us a good boost to further diversify what we can offer, to extend the briefings to further audiences and do it on a more regular level, which I think is a great thing. And so I really hope that you enjoyed today's briefing. So, I mean, we've heard today that gendered approaches are already very much changing the way we think, negotiate, and implement arms control pretty much across the board. There's now growing awareness about the relationship between gender and access to training and decision-making in disarmament. And I think we've also gained a better understanding of how gender roles shape engagement with weapons and its relevance in assistance programs delivered to survivors. At the multilateral level, a people-centered, gendered approach is increasingly reflected in working papers, resolutions, and outcome documents of arms control and disarmament processes. And then I think Jamie alluded to this already in his opening remarks. In 2021, for example, all of the outcome documents adopted in the main conventional arms processes, Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention, Arms Trade Treaty, Convention on Cluster Munitions, and Program of Action on Small Arms and Light Weapons, all of them included issues related to gender, which is great news, I think. Alongside, of course, calls for harmonization of national policies on weapons and the WPS agenda. For example, there was support for the equal, full, and effective participation of women in all decision-making and implementation processes. States parties have taken innovative approaches now to strengthen gender mainstreaming, be it by engaging with informal gender working groups or by appointing gender focal points in different conventions. Again, the Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention and the Convention on Cluster Munitions are good examples here. It's probably still early days and maybe too soon to assess the full impact of these new working methods in arms control and disarmament, but this type of innovation can help to strengthen the conventions and improve programming on the ground where it has impact as well. Now, no doubt, much more needs to be done to overcome the long-standing gender imbalance in this area. And of course, also to transform stereotypes and associations between technical expertise and masculinities. In this regard, UNIDIR has been collecting good practices that are being implemented to promote gender equality in conventional arms control And I'll just give you a few examples of what the team has done. Collecting gender disaggregated data and supporting research on gendered impacts of weapons. Offering gender trainings and coaching programs. Reviewing recruitment processes to broaden the pool of candidates. Making women professionals visible in communication strategy and in the media. And engaging men in gender equality programs. And last but not least, donors, of course, that are driving change through capacity building and related initiatives. Above all, we're seeing more and more practitioners realizing that arms control efforts would be strengthened and more effective by the inclusion of more women and people of different backgrounds and career tracks. Diversity clearly is key here. The message is clear: a more diverse arms control field is a stronger field. Creating a level playing field is not only the right thing to do, but as we continuously say, it's also a smart thing to do, as more diversity in arms control can strengthen its effectiveness, and more employment opportunities for women in this area will certainly positively impact their own lives and the quality of life in their communities. UNIDIR will continue to develop this work and explore avenues that can improve women's participation and increase diversity across all areas of arms control and disarmament, including mine action and weapons and ammunition management. We invite you to follow our work and to reach out if you would like to propose research partnerships and ideas for collaboration. We're always open in this regard, and the more ideas we can collect, the better. Before we conclude today, I would like to thank Jamie for the opening remarks and all participants, of course, who joined us today. I would like to express, as always, our sincere gratitude to the governments of Canada, Ireland, Sweden, and Switzerland for supporting UNIDIR's work on gender and disarmament. My thanks to you all. I wish you a good day and a productive week, and I hope to see you at an UNIDIR event very soon. Thank you.